All right. Welcome to Rockford Reading Daily, episode 14, I believe. We are continuing to read Have Black Lives Ever Mattered by Mumia Abu-Jamal. Let's continue. Black Lives Matter, January 22nd, 2015. With news emerging that the FBI will not begin proceedings against killer cop Darren Wilson in the murder of black teenager Michael Brown of Ferguson, Missouri, we wonder how many people are surprised. Were his civil rights violated? Apparently not, except for his rights to, quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, end quote, of course. But for far too many black youth, this doesn't matter. Civil rights prosecution? Nope, not today. Not ever. The only thing that would have surprised us would be if there was a prosecution. But we needn't have worried about that. Recently, Sabrina Fulton, the grieving mother of Trayvon Martin, wrote a letter to the grieving mother of Mike Brown, Leslie. She wrote, "Further complicating this tragedy is the fact that the killer of your son is alive, known, and currently free. Your circle will necessarily close tighter because the trust you once, if ever, had in, quote, the system, end quote, and its agents is forever changed. But with those changes come new challenges and opportunities. You will experience a swell of support from all corners of the world. If they refuse to hear us, we will make them feel us. We will no longer be ignored. Mother to mother, son to son, injustice to injustice. Quote, Black Lives Matter, end quote. Not yet, they don't." Let's move on to the next passage. Ferguson, USA, March 5th, 2015. With breathless news report, the U.S. Justice Department Civil Rights Division investigation of the Ferguson Police Department paints a damning picture of a long, cruel, and bitter normalization of maltreatment, mass profiling, police targeting, and brutality against black people in the Missouri town. What may be even worse, however, is how the town's police, judges, and political leaders conspired to loot the community by fining them into more poverty with fines that supply approximately 25% of the country's budget. Correctly, cops have been criticized for their juvenile emails and texts of racism and contempt against the local black community and even black leaders in Washington, D.C. There is largely silence, however, over the role of judges who have used their robes to squeeze money from the community, issuing unfair fines and fees, even using their jails as an illegal kind of debtor's prison. In 1869, during the reign of England's Queen Victoria, a statute known as the Debtors Act was passed, which forever abolished imprisonment as punishment for debt. In today's Missouri, it's still used to punish and further impoverish people in low-income communities. But, truth be told, it ain't just Missouri. Renowned Rolling Stone writer Matt Taibbi, in his 2014 book, The Divide, tells a similar tale, but from points all across America: Brooklyn, Gainesville, Georgia, Los Angeles, San Diego, and beyond, where poor people are being squeezed by cops, judges, and local governments to part with their last dime to finance a system that is corrupt to the core. Taibbi's full title might give us some insight. The Divide: American Injustice in the Age of the Wealth Gap. This is America's official economic system, capitalism, a system of racialized exploitation and relentless predation. Okay, so I think from that first passage, the main thing that I take away, and the main thing that, or the first thing that stuck with me was, again, the title of the book being Asked Again. Have Black Lives Ever Mattered? And it seems to me that for multiple generations, from Trayvon Martin to Michael Brown, that question was answered in different iterations, and it was answered while we had a black standing president. And I think that individually, does the life of one individual black person matter? Yes. But collectively, do the lives of black people matter in this country, in this society? And the answer to that is no. And we see it reminded, and we see it told to us time and time again in the different ways that these black lives and these brown lives as well have been snatched away. In the different ways that people who are even associated with these ethnic groups or with these races have had their lives snuffed away. In the cases of African immigrants who were not even actually the descendants of slaves or what is considered the black population in American society, just because their skin color is the same as the black people here, they have had these gross injustices done to them. And so the answer to that question, have black lives ever mattered in this society? The answer is no. No, not yet. I like, and then it, and he ended it with the no, not yet. Nah, I agree, it's not yet. But we have the capacity and the power and the ability to make black lives matter. And then when he begins to speak about the investigation into the Ferguson Police Department, that type of investigation should be done in earnest in each police department around this nation, because that will be the first time that there is transparency made between the communities and the institutions of policing that exist in these communities. And until we have a transparent relationship, we will never be able to have a relationship that is not predatory. And when we say relationship, I don't say that in the sense of trying to have that building a relationship with the institution of policing that exists and the community that exists. I say relationship in the sense of understanding the institution of policing that exists and understanding why we have to tear down this institution piece by piece and brick by brick, and use those pieces and bricks to create equitable organizations and equitable institutions and equitable systems that will be able to mutually and benefit all of mankind and not exploit and oppress people. Okay. Words versus deeds. March 11th, 2015. For now, the fraternity Sigma Alpha Epsilon is perhaps the most well-known fraternity in the United States, for all the wrong reasons. It's also been disbanded from the campus of the University of Oklahoma at Norman for all the wrong reasons. Despite what you may believe, it's been disbanded because it got caught on tape and it embarrassed the university. Period. Consider this. A silly, racist chant among teenage college students lands several of them with immediate expulsions and the closure of their fraternity. In neighboring Missouri, an entire city infrastructure targets, oppresses, and leeches millions of dollars from a black community, Ferguson, and lest we forget, kills them on a whim. And who gets fired? No one. Oh, there are some resignations, yes, but not one firing. There's a world of difference between the two. In Oklahoma, the most powerless people on campus, the youngest, are handed the most extreme sanction expulsions. In Missouri, politicians and police criminally conspired to loot, exploit, and bleed an entire community, but not a single person gets fired. What's worse? Racist words or racist actions that harm thousands of people for years. The University of Oklahoma, founded in 1890, could have used this as, well, a teaching moment about the way racism moves from one generation to the next and how closed systems and groups perpetuate harm against their fellow Americans. The university, while disclaiming the racism, could have used its history department to teach the roots of such social injustice in American and Oklahoman history. If it has an African American studies program, it could have been a time to shine, by providing a study program for members of Sigma Alpha Epsilon. But, first and foremost, it could have defended the First Amendment principle of freedom of speech and used the light of reason to flesh out the power of racist hatred. Instead, a 19-year-old is marked, perhaps for life, with the brand of racism for being drunk, stupid, and mean. After the shock wears off, bitterness will fill his soul. Colleges and universities, of all places, can't jump the gun for PR reasons. They must use opportunities to teach, to enlighten, to broaden consciousness for all students, even those, especially those, who love to sing about hanging niggers. That brings us to the end of that passage. And I think that one of my initial thoughts upon reading about this action that took place on this campus is how institutional racism and these institutional evils permeate the society so deeply that individuals begin to take their cues from these institutions. And one of the things that permits these institutions to continue to exist with the power that they have currently is the lack of education about these institutions, the lack of information that people have about these institutions, the lack of education around racism, the lack of education around poverty. And so I agree that we have to use these opportunities as teaching moments as often as possible, because of the fact that it is more important for somebody to learn a lesson from a racist action or from a racist statement than it is to humiliate or than it is to denigrate a person for the racist statement or racist action. And again, that is when you're dealing with something on an individualistic level, which is separate from dealing with something on an institutional level. And the comparison that Mumia Abu-Jamal makes, I think, is perfect, that just in the neighboring state of Missouri, they have legalized racism. And in Oklahoma, it's fucking Oklahoma. Oklahoma has legalized racism, have institutions where people profit off of racism and profit off of bigotry. And so it's beyond hypocritical to punish an individual who partakes in that racism or partakes in that bigotry, to try to, again, offer up some type of scapegoat to try to avoid the bigger issue of speaking of the institutional evils and the institutional issues. And I think that is what we have to do, that the institutions are what we must destroy, not necessarily the individuals inside of those institutions. The individuals, I believe, we must transform. And teaching moments help to transform people. Let's continue. 137 shots. May 24th, 2015. A man drives his companion down a Cleveland street, and before he knows it, police sirens bite into the night air, sending a chill down the spine. He pushes his foot down on the accelerator, trying to avoid the madness. Little does he know that within minutes, he and his companion will be shown their last vision in life. 137 shots fired into them, courtesy of Cleveland's finest. This happened in 2012 on a Saturday. A judge there acquitted a cop for leaping atop a car's hood and pumping 15 rounds from his semi-automatic into the bodies of the two occupants of the car. A total of 137 bullets were fired into a car containing two unarmed people. The use of lethal force was said to have been triggered by a car's backfire. Legal? Justifiable? The two unarmed people who were killed by police had traces of drugs in their system, the judge noted. They were thus expendable. 137 shots. It's okay. No biggie, boys. Boys will be boys, right? The law is not but opinion, whether the judges or anyone else's for that matter. In the season of Ferguson, when the youth are in the streets yelling, quote, "Black Lives Matter," end quote, we learn that this is more aspiration than reality. It is a bitter hope in the cold kingdom of the law, for today, black lives don't matter a bit. Have they ever? And this story of the 137 shots that were fired into the car in Cleveland, I've read about that story one time previously in the book The End of Policing, which is written by Alex Vitale, which is an amazing piece of work. And sorry about this. I know that chord probably giving some feedback, which is an amazing piece of work and really illustrates the reason that we cannot simply try to reform policing and takes time to speak about different forms of policing. And so that was the first time that I read about that story of the 137 shots in Cleveland. And again, excuse me. Sorry about that, y'all. The egregiousness of a police officer hopping on top of a car and shooting 15 times. The readiness to play judge, jury, and executioner that police officers have comes from this culture of impunity which permeates the institution of policing. And until that culture is destroyed, we will continue to have these type of acts of violence happening upon citizens. And for each one of these stories that we know of national exposure, which Mumia Abu-Jamal has taken the time to speak of, there are hundreds that we don't know of and hundreds that don't have that national exposure. The heritage of the Confederate battle flag, July 7th, 2015. The current controversy over the Confederate battle flag fluttering over the Capitol building in Columbia, South Carolina, is a testament to many things, the least of which is whether it is a symbol of racism. It is a measure of how backward and repressive some areas of the country are, caught in the fractured memory of the past, a past that was, for millions, far more horrific than it was glorious. Anyone who studies American history learns that South Carolina constantly threatened to secede from the Union. Indeed, in the classic work of French political scientist Alex de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, written several generations before the firing on Fort Sumter, South Carolina, threatens to split from the Union. That contrariness, that sense of false, bruised pride, that deep paranoia bred into the bone because of the knowledge of centuries of crimes and cruelties waged against Africans, lies in the heart of the state like a stone. Of all the slave-built colonies of the South, none exceeded South Carolina for its huge, teeming population of black families who were forced to live in terror. That is the heritage of the Confederate battle flag, one of terror and violence, in the name of white supremacy and black subjugation, that advances a system of organized theft of black labor, freedom, and humanity. Dylan, Dumb and Dumber, Ruth, knew what the flag stood for, as well as the flags of apartheid, South Africa, and the former Rhodesia. He knew what he was wearing and waving. History has consigned the apartheid flags and Rhodesia's banners to the annals of the past. But in parts of the United States, the Confederate flag flaps in the breeze as if it were the still 1860. For far too many people, the Civil War, still ain't over. That makes me think about being in middle school. Went to Lincoln Middle School. Actually, this actually happened to me in high school. Being in Jefferson High School, different names, same racist. At Jefferson High School, and I was in a class, and we were talking about the Confederate flag, and a white kid said that the Confederate flag wasn't racist. And I immediately said that it was racist, and me and him immediately began to have a verbal altercation in the classroom, and I remember getting kicked out the classroom because of this verbal altercation that we had. But as far back as I can think, and as far back as I know, the Confederate flag is racist. When I see the Confederate flag, it means racism. It's just like hearing the word nigger, or seeing somebody being lynched, or seeing pictures of a slave being whipped, or seeing a picture of black people in chains. They all or seeing a picture of a mugshot of a black person being beat, or seeing a picture of a cop shooting black people, or seeing a picture of a cop with his knee on a black person's neck. They all scream the same racist sentiments to me, and they have for as far back as I can recall and I can think. And so when we live in a society where some people will claim, okay, some of that last segment got cut off, so let's pick up on the next passage. As black as they were expendable. August 25th, 2015. It's been 10 years since the watery carnage of Katrina, and 1 year since the fiery rage lit the night skies of Ferguson. And between the two harrowing events lay the state of black America, isolated, demonized, and damned. When the levees broke and the rushing waters of Hurricane Katrina swept into the neighborhoods of New Orleans, the Ninth Ward, the blackest ward, received the greatest damage and the least relief. Today, 10 years after its horrific flood, the Ninth is back to barely half of its former population of working class and low-income inhabitants. It is but a shell of its pre-storm glory. What the residents of the Ninth learned was the hard, cold truth that they were all on their own, alone, facing the fury of the storm. Oh, they could call 911, and they may have even gotten an answer, but no one came to help them. For they were in the Ninth Ward, as black as they were expendable. Flip to Ferguson, summer of 2014, the time of Mike Brown's killing by a cop, and the subsequent explosion of protests by black youth nationwide. Young black men, women, and children took to the streets and faced scared, paranoid white cops armed to the teeth with sniper rifles, automatic weapons, and Humvees. How many of us know that protests have continued every day since then? The media may have fled the story, but the people haven't. Some have pitched tents. Others have set daily times to join the protest. But they are there every day to remind us of their very deep and very real discontent with an oppressive system that has soured their days and nights. For the fires of Ferguson still burn. They burn in their hearts, they simmer in their souls, they roar in their minds. And Katrina, if we ever wonder whether Black Lives mattered, the squalid treatment of the people of New Orleans, especially the Ninth Ward, answered that question decisively. Politicians, banks, media, and entrepreneurs plucked what they could and kept on moving, leaving the intrepid souls of the Ninth to fend for themselves, isolated, demonized, damned. Katrina and Ferguson, touch points for Black America. Excuse me for that yawn in there. That ends that passage. And I remember when Hurricane Katrina took place. I was in 9th grade, I believe, when Hurricane Katrina took place. I remember Kanye West getting on TV and saying that George Bush didn't care about black people. I remember that being the first time that I understood and realized that the person who was the president was racist and had racist ideologies, and I knew that my mom wanted Al Gore to win the presidential election, and that she didn't want George Bush to win. But at that time when the election had took place, I didn't really understand politics, and I didn't even understand when Hurricane Katrina took place. But I was old enough to understand what it meant for Kanye West to say that George Bush didn't care about black people. I was old enough to understand what it meant to see these videos of black people basically drowning, of black people being abandoned, of black people being called looters that were trying to get food. And it was also one of my first experiences with seeing people being called looters. And so as we go through these different touchstones in history, again, in all type of different, and this is a macro-aggression of racial injustice. What took place in Hurricane Katrina is a macro-aggression of racial injustice. And what we have read about previously have been macro-aggressions, primarily of police terrorism, macroaggressions primarily of mass incarceration, and now we have a macroaggression that is directly tied to racial injustice. Let's try to knock out one more passage. Tamir Rice of Cleveland, October 15th, 2015. Question: when is a child not a child? Answer: when it's a black child. That question and answer came to me when I heard that the police killing of 12-year-old Tamir Rice of Cleveland was ruled, quote, justified, end quote, by two so-called, quote, independent, end quote, boards of inquiry recently. The cop was justified, they ruled, because he saw a gun. Period. Did it matter that the gun was a toy? Or that Tamir was a boy? No. Both facts were declared irrelevant. And the life of yet another beautiful black child is snatched with impunity by the state. What kind of system is this, where a child's life can be so easily, so utterly evaporated? What kind of country is this where this can happen? For almost a year, state forces dithered around the case. Now they have issued their cold-leaden decision. No biggie, the cop was scared, is justified. Next. What's next? Killing pregnant black women who are suspected of creating more black boys? In the name of protocol, in the name of tradition, in the code name of fear, black children are killed so that white cops can feel safe. This system is intolerable and must be abolished. And that brings us to the end of that passage. And the first thing that I think about these days when I hear about the story of Tamir Rice, I think about the story of Logan Bell, who had had similarities to Tamir Rice, was a local case here, police terrorism, where Logan Bell was having a mental health crisis, and Logan Bell's grandmother called the Rockford Police Department because she believed him to be a danger to himself. And when the Rockford Police Department arrived on the scene, they shot Logan Bell 16 times. They knew he had a BB gun. He had the BB gun in his hand when they arrived. He told them he wasn't going to put the gun down, that they would have to shoot him, and he shot a BB. And an officer tripped and fell after he shot the BB. And then that is when these other officers shot him 16 times, shooting him through the head, shooting him in the head 3 times. And the shots that killed him went through his heart and his lungs. And so that's the story I think of when I hear of Tamir Rice. I also think of Tamir Rice's mother, who I've seen on different platforms speaking about the struggle she's waging around bringing justice for her son's murder, her son's 21st century lynching. I think about the sister of Tamir Rice, who was in that video, who the police officers wouldn't let go to her brother. I think about the dangers that exist for having black skin, for having dark skin in this society, and how many children have been murdered simply because of that skin. I think about what that must do to the psyche of other young black children. I think about what it did to me as a young black child. I think about what it is doing and what it will continue to do to my young black son and to my young black cousins and to my friends' young black children. And those are all the things that come to mind as I read through that passage. And I think that'll be it. This gets us to about our 30-minute mark. And so let's wrap up this Rockford Reading Daily. I want to ask you to please share this on whichever platform you happen to be listening to it on, whether that's Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, Anchor, Facebook, YouTube. Please share this. If you have not listened to previous episodes of Rockford Reading Daily, please go back and listen to the previous episodes. If there are more episodes out past this one, please go back and listen to those. The future episodes. Please listen to the Social Construct of Leslie podcast, which comes out on Sundays and Thursdays. Leaderless by Ari Perez is a podcast series that we have out. And please go listen to our Live from Occupy City Hall podcast. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Rockford Reading Daily. We outside.